Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. Are you still awake? Excellent. All right. Welcome. My name is Elise Benin. I'm on the programming team here for the conference. I am also the host of the How Design Live podcast. Raise your hand if you've heard the podcast. Only a few people. All right. Well, go listen to it. It's on iTunes. And I'm also the founder of marketing-mentor.com. And I'm here to introduce our next speaker. So, have you ever had a client or a stakeholder tell you that they didn't like the red in a logo? Because his wife didn't like red. Yes. I'll bet you didn't know how to respond to that. Well, that's the kind of thing that Adam Conner knows how to respond to that. And he explained it to me, actually, in a recent podcast interview that we did. And that's just a taste of what Adam does as designer and strategist and VP of Organizational Design and Training at MadPow, where he applies the process of design to almost anything, including the design of organizations, especially big ones, with the ultimate goal of helping teams work effectively together. He coaches his clients on how to discuss design using active listening and clear communication, so much easier said than done. So please join me in welcoming Adam Conner.
Whew, this is a big room. Can you guys hear my heart through the microphone? I got my start about 16 years ago working in a large financial services company. And I was very lucky that I started as a web design intern doing banners. And at about that time, UX kind of got root in the company. And I was there to kind of see it mature and mature with it. And so I was working on a lot of tools and apps and products for financial advisors, for consumers, to help them with their insurance needs. But we were a small team. We were like 5 people in a building of 5,000. And I spent pretty much every day bitching about everybody that I had to work with. Because the stuff they said to me in the meetings where we're going over designs was so inane and so outright stupid that I, as a young kid, just didn't understand where the hell these people had crawled out of. And so I would complain to my manager day after day after day about these stupid things that people were saying to me, and she would say, "Adam, it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be all right." And she would tap me on the shoulder. And then one day, we got a call from a team that really wanted our help. And us being a small team and wanting to make as many allies as we could in the company, we were like, sure, yeah, we'll help. And they're like, well, we don't have a budget. Like, we can't pay you to be part of this project. And we're like, well, still, we'll help. What do you want us to do? Well, can we send you our mock-ups? Can we send you our wireframes? And can you send us back your feedback on them? Sure, we can do that. That's like, what, an hour or 2 hours out of our time? So they send us their stuff. They can't be with us to go over it. And my team and I, we go down into our meeting room, and the person who's made contact with this other team, she's going to be responsible for taking all the notes and for sending them this feedback that we are going to so lovingly give them. And the comps go up on the projector. What the fuck is that? 37 options in a drop-down? Radio buttons scattered all over the place? Center justified type? Who the hell did this? It went on for an hour straight. And every 15 minutes or so, we'd stop ourselves and we'd be like, oh, we should be serious about this. Let's give them some feedback. Let's give them some good feedback. But immediately, we would just start trashing this thing again. And at the end of the hour, my teammate put her head down on the table and cried. Because she's like, I have to send these people something. I can't send them that they suck. That's not going to go over well for us. And it was at that point that I realized that, man, this shit's hard. Like, there's got to be something here. And so I focused a good part of my career on trying to figure out what that was. And I met another gentleman who had a similar interest, Aaron. And for the past 6 years, we've been trying to figure out how can we help teams, designers, developers, marketers, business analysts, stakeholders, executives. How can we help these people talk about design in a way that's actually productive? And so that's what I want to talk about today, because as I'm sure you've all experienced in your careers, in your lives, conversations are like one of the most painful things we can put ourselves through. But we have to have them. We have to talk with other people. Conversations and talking with others, that's how we get work done, because we have to work with other people. So we have to figure out, how is it that we can go about talking to one another and really make this work for all of us, really make this work for the thing we're designing? So Aaron and I went out to a bunch of friends and a bunch of contacts, and we're like, okay, give us the best feedback you've ever gotten. And I put best in air quotes here. And this is like what we get. Now, I don't know about you, but if you at any point in your career produce work that does not have enough fa la 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 la, hang it up. You're done. And again, so no one thinks I'm biased, these are all comments that were given to others by designers. These were given by designers to other designers. We all struggle with this stuff. And so as Aaron and I did our research and talked to people about the kinds of conversations they were having, where they were having conversations, who they were having conversations with, we always came back to this one word: feedback. There's a lot of talk about feedback these days and the importance of feedback. And everybody was using the word, but as Aaron and I talked to them, we got the sense that not everybody meant the same thing when they used this word. So we started to kind of pick it apart, and what we found was there are really 3 kinds of feedback. There's reaction, and that looks like this. It comes from the gut. You see something, you feel something, you verbalize it. And it's not always negative. Sometimes it's positive. Somebody shows you something, and you're like, oh, that's awesome, great, good job, right? But that's a reaction. And it's not really all that helpful when we're trying to take our design to the next level, right? Because it's not really telling us anything about the design necessarily, about specifically what in the design is meeting its objectives or not meeting its objectives. The next one we found was direction. And this was the one that tripped people up the most, because they thought it was constructive criticism. They thought it was this thing that was good and useful, but it doesn't always good and useful. This is where someone tells you about what you could have done or should have done, or have you considered this instead? But again, this doesn't help us look and examine our design and say, you know what, this component right here, that's actually working counter to what I'm trying to achieve. Or this thing here, well, that really is producing the effect I want. Direction doesn't really help us do that. Direction just tells us what that other person thinks the solution should be or could be. So what we really want in these conversations, what we're trying to get to as we talk to other designers, as we talk to the other roles on our project teams that we need to work with, what we're trying to get at is critical thinking. Critical thinking is this very basic skill that we all are examined for in grade school. Can you look at a statement and decide for yourself whether or not it's true or false? When we're talking about our designs, when we're having these conversations, we want to be able to look at our designs and say, is this design working towards this objective? Is it meeting this goal? Is it solving this need? True or false? That's what we're trying to do. And that's what critique is. That's all critique is. So if you look at what critique looks like in a conversation, you get something that is really much more wordy, much more thought out, right? If the objective is for users to seriously consider the impact of their bank balance before making a purchase, an objective, that's what I'm trying to do, right? Placing the balance at the bottom of the screen at the same size as all the other numbers. This is the element of the design I'm talking about. Isn't effective. I don't think it's going to work because it gets lost in all of the other information. And here's why, right? That's the kind of information that we're trying to suss out in these conversations. That's what we want to get at. But we have to get better at getting that information because people don't talk like that. People talk like the stuff above that, right? They talk in reactions. They talk in direction. So we have to get better ourselves at giving critique, but also at trying to facilitate and structure our conversations to get others to give us critique. And so to do that, we need tools, we need a plan, we need to put some serious damn thought into this, okay? And so here's a really simple framework that you can use anytime someone asks you for feedback on a design in order to make sure that you are giving them critique. First, what are the objectives of the design? Do you know them? Are you assuming them? Can you ask about them? Then, what are the related design elements? Based on what you're looking at right now, what elements have some kind of impact or effect on the objective that you're thinking about? Are they effective? Are they going to achieve the objectives? Do you think, based on your knowledge, that that's going to work? Yes or no? And why or why not? It's 4 questions. That's all it is. Now, maybe you have enough information that you can spit this all out at once, but more than likely, you're going to have to ask questions. You're going to have a dialogue. And so that's why when we have these discussions, it's always important to remember that there are 2 sides. There's someone giving the feedback, and there's someone receiving it. And at the foundation of these 2 sides, at the foundation of this conversation, is intention. What is it that we are intending to do? Why are we having this conversation? Because giving critique, giving feedback with the wrong intent is a self-focused act, almost always. You can see this anytime any major organization puts out something new, a new product, a new campaign, a new whatever. Watch Twitter, watch Facebook, watch whatever. You will see every designer and their grandmother come out to shit on it. But how many of them actually know the conversations that took place in those rooms? How many of them actually know the objectives that were set for that campaign or that product? And does any of those comments that they're posting on those networks at all work to actually improve the product or the campaign or whatever it is we're talking about? No. They're about getting attention for themselves. Look at me. I have an opinion. Giving critique with the right intent is objective focused. It's all about helping the product, helping whatever it is we're designing meet its objectives, moving it forward. I have no idea what the intention or what the objectives of this wiener dog are, but I love him so much that he's in the deck. So when you're giving critique, remember to use a filter, because you are going to have a reaction. You can't stop that from happening. But you don't know what's causing that reaction necessarily. It could be a bias of your own. It could be something else. You could be in a bad mood from earlier in the day. Who knows? Don't spit it out. Hold on to it. Get more information. Revisit it when the timing is more appropriate in the conversation. Don't assume, right? Find out the reason behind the thinking. Don't assume that you know the objective. The easiest way to get rid of an assumption is just to ask. So I assume that you're trying to achieve this. Is that true? Yes or no? Yes, great. No, okay, so what are you trying to achieve? Don't invite yourself. The person on the other end, the receiver, has to be in the right kind of headspace to listen to what you're going to say and do something with it, right? And if you just start spitting stuff out at them, they might not be there. And that can go south really fast. Lead with questions. Find out about things. Ask people about what they're trying to achieve, about what their thinking was. This gives you more information, but it also helps them feel a little more comfortable in the conversation because you're trying to build that understanding. Talk about strengths. My mother always said, don't say anything unless if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. That doesn't work in the real world. Thanks, Mom. Great advice. But in critiques, we tend to only ever focus on the negative stuff because that's what stands out to us. Negative experiences stand out more in our memories than positive ones, right? But here's what happens if you don't talk about strengths. You go through a critique, talk about all the things that maybe need to be worked on the next iteration. Awesome. Design goes back, works on all those things. Brings it back a week later. All the stuff that had been good is now missing. Because in the process of changing all the stuff that you said needed to be worked on, that stuff got folded in. So now what? If you'd have talked about strengths, that stuff would have stayed. Not only that, but one of the greatest skills that we have as designers is the ability to abstract a solution from over here and put it into a problem over here to create a new solution. So if we know that something's working really well in one part of our design, we might be able to borrow that to lift up a part that's not working as well. So make sure you talk about strengths. Nobody in this room, and I repeat, nobody in this room is Kanye. Kanye is not Kanye, at least not as how he thinks of himself. Receiving critique takes humility, it takes restraint. You are not infallible. There's always room for improvement. You have to be ready for that. Asking for feedback means that, hey, I want to take this design forward, and I want your help to do that. So I'm expecting you to think critically about this work with me. If you are not prepared to do that, then don't ask for critique. If you want a hug, ask for a hug. Okay? So when you're receiving critique, remember the purpose. This is not about judgment. It is not about pass or fail. It is not about stop or go. It's about understanding and improvement. Think before responding. Do you know what somebody is trying to tell you? Your brain can process information approximately 4 times faster than a mouth can produce it. So what that means is that as someone is speaking to you, your brain latches onto the first few words out of their mouth, basically forms an assumption about the rest of the things they're going to say and what their point is, starts to formulate a rebuttal, and then sits on idle, waiting for them to pause just long enough for you to interject. Don't do that. You've got to stop yourself from doing that. Participate. Analyze the proposed solution with everybody else. This will help you get out of that kind of space of being defensive about your design. It also helps the other people feel comfortable about giving you feedback. And set the foundation. Use the agreements that you had from before you started working on the design about what you were trying to achieve to focus the conversation. Now, there are 3 places in the design process that Aaron and I have found that these kinds of things come up: standalone critiques, design reviews, and collaborative activities. And I'll talk about all 3, but before I do, I want to give you some general things that kind of span across all 3. First thing, keep in mind that critique is a skill. You're going to need to practice. No one does this naturally. You're going to have to work at it. If you're introducing this to a group, start small. Don't go in and try to do this in a room full of 20 people. Do this just one-on-one at first, and then build up from there. Think before you speak. I'm going to say this a lot because it comes up a lot. Understand what people are trying to tell you and what you're going to try to tell them before it comes out of your mouth. Choose who you critique with carefully. Some people suck at life. Some people will never be able to do this. You cannot always control the people who you have to have conversations with, but where you can, where you want to have productive critiques and where you can control the people that are going to be part of that conversation, choose wisely. There are some rules to keep in mind as well. The first thing is to avoid problem solving. This is the hardest thing for designers to do because it is immediately what our brains go to. But if you are in a conversation about analyzing a design and someone pitches a new idea or an alternative idea, now in that room, amongst those people who are trying to analyze the first design, you've also got people trying to analyze the second design, people trying to just understand the two designs themselves, maybe somebody trying to come up with a third, and a bunch of people just twiddling their thumbs or looking at their phones. You got to keep everybody on the same page. So stay in the critique. Analyze the design. After the critique, you can start to brainstorm on all those things that you identified needed to be worked on a little bit more. You can do that collaboratively with others. Everyone should be equal in the critique. Everybody should have equal say, should have equal time. Nobody should feel left out. After the critique, you can think about who is a subject matter expert in what, and how does that affect how you weigh their feedback. But if people get shut out in the critique, that's going to come back to haunt you. Everyone is a critic. You want to make sure everybody's participating. Everybody has a perspective. And sometimes you really need to make sure you hear all those perspectives. What happens if someone is silent? Typically, it goes like this. You have the conversation, somebody doesn't say something, conversation ends, you go off, you work, project continues on, and then down the road, lo and behold, you get this bit of feedback coming from maybe your manager or higher up. Because that person who didn't say something, they said something to somebody else outside of the critique. That person said something to somebody else, maybe their manager, and it went up a ladder, over, and now it's coming down on your head, and there's no time for you to do a damn thing about it. So make sure you get everybody participating. And as someone asking for feedback, you have a responsibility for next steps. You do not just take that feedback, go off on your merry way, and sayonara, I'll see you all some other time. No, you've just engaged these people. You got to follow up with them. You got to let them see how stuff evolves. So make sure you do that. I get asked a lot about the I like and I don't like rule of critique. Like, I'm not supposed to say I like something, and I'm not supposed to say I don't like something. And it's true, because it's not about this personal preference of yours. But here's the thing. People say I like and I don't like naturally. And if you tell them they can't say those words, they're going to say it, and they're going to be like, I like. Oh, crap, I'm not supposed to say I like. Shit. Right? And it totally throws them off. Let them say it, but have them back up what they like or don't like by relating it to an objective. Okay? I want to talk about setting the foundation. We got to make sure that we're starting from the same place. Aaron and I, as we were doing our research, we went in, we sat in on some of these conversations, and afterwards we would ask people like, so tell me a little bit about this project that you're working on. Like, what are you trying to do? And we'd ask people separately, coming out of the same conversation, and we would get completely different answers. How good is a conversation or a design or anything going to go if everybody's trying to achieve something different? It never goes well. You've got to make sure you're all starting from the same place. And luckily, at least in my world, we have some really great, really simple tools for doing that. We've got personas. These are archetypes around behaviors, attitudes, needs, context. This is not about demographics. This is not marketing personas. This is behavioral archetypes. I don't give a rat's ass about your demographics. Because what those do is they lead to stereotypes. They lead people to think that people are going to behave in a certain way that isn't necessarily true. You get to behavioral archetypes through research to understand how do people really act in certain situations. What do they really think? What do they really do, and why? Right? So we want to develop real personas. We need goals. What is it we're trying to achieve? How are we going to know that that future state that we're trying to create has actually happened? What's that stuff we can measure? These can be business goals. These can be user goals, consumer goals. But we have to have something that we can track to. We have principles. We have the characteristics of the solution itself, the solution's persona, so to speak. One-word principles are going to kill you every time. Don't use one-word principles like romantic or fun or energetic, because what one person thinks those things are, another person thinks is completely different. So define them more than that. And we have scenarios. We have stories that describe the experience we want people to have, what we want them to think and feel and do as they interact with our solution. This gives us something to shoot for. This gives us an idea of that future we are trying to create, what we want this experience to be. These four things create a box around our solution, a boundary that we can then analyze our ideas within and say, does it help us get to these things? Does it help us make this scenario real? Does it work for this persona? So use these kinds of things. Come to an agreement on these things before you start your solutions. As you work on those ideas, as you work on those solutions, these will get refined because you'll learn more about them. You'll learn more about what principles really are and how precise goals need to be. But you've got to start from a shared understanding. So let's talk about standalone critiques. I love standalone critiques because you can do them whenever you want. You can have formal ones. You can have informal ones. I can put this as time on people's calendar. I can make it a recurring session. Or if I've been staring at my damn screen for 2 hours, I can grab the person next to me and say, hey, let's talk about this for a little bit. Help me out. You can do them pretty much any time, but there are some guardrails. Think of your overall project as this kind of timeline. At the beginning, there's this portion of time where you're just coming up with the idea. It's just little sparks of thoughts flying around in your head, and you haven't yet connected them all. That first kind of, I don't know, maybe 20% of time where you're formulating that stuff, where you're pulling it together, that's too soon. You start to critique stuff now, and you're just going to kill it before it's ever had time to live. There's a time at the end where you want to be shipping stuff, where this stuff's got to get out the door. Then maybe we start on the next version or whatever. That last 20%, that's too late. Because if you're just making endless revisions there, it's never going to get out the door. So it's that middle span, that middle 60% or so, that is right for critique. Early on, you're talking more high level, you're talking more conceptual, you're talking overall structure and flow. Later on, you're getting into details, you're getting into precision, right? So think about this timeline, think about where you are in it. Because critique is really just one more tool we have in this iterative cycle, right? You know, we come up with a problem statement, we come up with this thing we're trying to solve for, we observe, we evaluate that world, learn something about it, we synthesize those observations, come up with a theory, a hypothesis about how we're going to solve for it, we create a solution or we refine an existing solution, we put that out in the world again, we observe, we evaluate, we just go round and round. And critique is just this tool we have in observe and evaluate. I can do this as many times as I want in a day on the stuff I'm working on. It's all about iteration and improvement. And as long as we're looking to improve on what we're creating, we have an opportunity for critique. That's where it fits in our process. So who do you want to invite to these things? In the spaces I work in, I want to make sure that these are cross-functional groups. I want to invite developers. I want to invite marketers. I want to invite business analysts and stakeholders and executives and graphic designers, because we've all got to create this solution together. I try to keep it to about 3 to 6 people. There was a study a while back that looked at how many people can you have at dinner at a restaurant and just have one conversation before it starts to break off into a bunch of splinter conversations. And they found that at around 6 people is where it caps out. After 6, that's where the potential for you to have a lot of splinter conversations goes way up. So keep it to about 3 to 6 people, all right? You want to make sure that you're thinking about what it is you're going to look at. What are we critiquing? What aspect of the design are we looking at right now? Do I have the right people in the room to be talking about that stuff? And then you got to get things going right. You got to start everything off on the right foot. So how do we present? Do we spend the first 45 minutes walking everybody through the design and then the last 15 minutes talking? No. You want to get through that presentation fast. From a technology standpoint, from an interactive design standpoint, I will offer you this one bit of advice because I've seen too many people do it, and it drives me up the wall. If you ever present a web page, an app, screen, anything like that, never, ever, 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 ever stand in front of the room and go, and here's the header, and this is the right rail, and here's the banner. Here's the main content. They can see that because you're putting it in front of them. Don't do that. Present the experience. What is somebody intended to think, feel, and do? What actions will they take? What do they think, feel, and do then? What action do they take then? That's how you should walk people through stuff. If you need to, tell people a little bit more about critique, about the type of feedback you're looking for. And always make sure to remind people of that foundation. What are your objectives? What are we trying to get people to think, feel, and do? Okay? Get that stuff out of the way. Don't get hung up on talking about constraints. Oh, well, I wanted it to work this way, but Bob in IT says it can't. Why? Because everybody else in that room is going to hear it as an excuse. Let constraints and things like that come up naturally in the conversation. So get that presentation off on the right foot, and then it's time to facilitate. Facilitation is not a skill we're taught as designers, but it damn well should be. Facilitation is just this conscious act of guiding a conversation, of making sure a conversation stays on track to meet its objectives. That's all it is. And as designers, we're going to be leading a lot of these conversations, so we damn well better know how to facilitate. So in facilitating your critiques, set goals for that conversation. What is it you want to talk about that day? What precisely are you looking at in that design? Active listening, right? You want to make sure that you understand what people are telling you. So listen to what they say and repeat it back to them, not word for word, but in your own understanding to make sure you have a shared understanding. Round robin and quotas. It seems childish, but it works. Sometimes people are hesitant to get these conversations rolling. So you can use things like quotas, like just tell me 2 things you think are working towards the objective and 1 thing you think isn't, that needs more work, right? Gives them a little structure. Or round robin. To start things off, we're just going to go around the room. But only to start things off, because if you run an hour-long session just going around the room, now it's your turn, now it's your turn, now it's your turn, now it's your turn, that's going to kill everybody. Don't do that. Use it at the beginning, and then you can actually use it at the end, again, just to make sure you give everybody a final say. Direct inquiry. Ask people specifically for feedback when you notice them being quiet, or when the thing you're talking about happens to be like their matter of expertise. 6 thinking hats. This is a facilitation technique from Edward de Bono, right? In it, everybody in a conversation is wearing the same colored hat. And the color of the hat that everybody's wearing at that time represents a way of looking at whatever it is they're examining. So I can never remember all the colors, right? But I think black is we're going to look at and talk about all the negative aspects. And yellow is we're going to talk about all the emotional aspects, right? And so everybody wears the same hat at the same time. Everybody's focused on the same lens. And you can use those colored hats, or you could do something your own. You could say, first, we're going to look at the design from this persona's perspective, and then we're going to look at it from that persona's perspective. But you do that to keep everybody on the same wavelength. And you can use facilitators. You can bring in a third party to run these conversations. But don't do that for long. Learn how to do this on your own, because when you have that third party, you get some kind of weird tweaks in the conversation, because that person doesn't really know that you know all you need to know from the conversation, or that someone else has said all they need to say. So they say, okay, are you finished? Do you understand? Can we move on? Right? And it makes for a lot less natural conversation. So try to get good at facilitating these yourselves. You are going to have to deal with difficult people. Like I said earlier, some people suck at life. You are going to run into people who don't do this well. It's not because they're assholes. Some of them are, but not everyone. Some of them just struggle, right? Some people get frustrated. I watched a chair fly across the room in one of these sessions at one point. I have not seen anybody shed blood yet. It's a matter of time. You are going to have to deal with these people, so you better have a plan. If you have any kind of a sense that you're in a difficult situation, don't be afraid to remind people about what critique is, about the type of feedback you want. If you feel like you need to share the rules, share the rules. Aaron is a big fan of having the rules printed out on poster board on the wall, right? Talk about the things, the foundation, the shared agreements that you had around personas, objectives, principles, all of that. Use that. If someone starts saying, oh, I don't like that color because it reminds me of the color of the sweater that my ex-wife gave me for Christmas. True story. How do you deal with that? How do you come back from that? Well, if you have personas, if you have principles, if you have things you can go back to, you can say, well, can you tell me a little bit about how that color will affect this audience, right? Get people to relate it to the things that actually matter. Or you can use another technique that I'm a huge fan of called the 5 whys, right? Anybody here have a kid? Anybody here been a kid? And you know what I'm talking about, right? Children ask why incessantly. Why this, Dad? It just is. But why? But why? But why? You don't be a dick about it. Like, don't do that to somebody. But if you ask people for a little bit more information over and over again, 3 to 5 times, people will drill into their thoughts, into their feedback, and one of 2 things will happen. Either they'll get to a point where they realize, you know what, this is just my personal preference and it absolutely doesn't have anything to do with what we're trying to achieve here, let's move on. Or they do actually relate it back to an objective, a principle, a goal, a scenario, what have you, right? And then it's feedback that you can use. And then the last thing I would say is don't be afraid to critique with difficult people one-on-one instead of in a group. One-on-one dynamics are way different than group dynamics. And you can often get way more feedback. And sometimes I've had those people then say, hey, I don't need to go to the group discussion, right? Because you've heard everything I have to say, so we're good. You know my point of view. Like, I don't have to be there, right? And then you have a much better group discussion, too, because that difficult person isn't there shutting down other people, right? So don't be afraid to do that. Afterwards, you've got to follow through. Thank people for their time, right? Follow up with people. If there's assumptions you need to look into, do that with people. If people seem to have ideas for how to address the things that thought could be worked on, set up time to explore those ideas with them. Let people know when you might get together again, what you'll be looking at that point in time. But follow through and keep this conversation going. Let's move on to design reviews. Design reviews, when Aaron and I talked to organizations, were the point where people thought critique was supposed to be happening, but really, they're not, right? Design reviews are these sessions that are actually more often about pass or go, fail or succeed, right? They're about getting somebody to sign off. And in that, they conflict with a lot of what critique is about, because critique is about iteration. You go into a critique expecting to do more work, not trying to be done with that work so you can move on to something else. So you need to make sure that you do something with these reviews, because you're still going to have them to get better feedback out of them. So take control if you can. This does not mean that you just take over the entire conversation, but if you can be the one to set up the review, do it. If you can be the one to kick it off, do it, right? Pretend you're dealing with difficult people, because often you are. Often the people in these reviews aren't there just to give you critique. They're there because they have a laundry list of things they want to make sure are in this design, and they just want to give you a checklist to fill out and make sure all that stuff actually gets done. So make sure that you take those same kinds of approaches. Recap objectives. Talk about what it is you're there to achieve. What's the problem you're trying to solve? Who are you trying to solve it for? And don't rely on them for critique. If you value that feedback, have critiques before you even get to the review. The last thing I want to talk about is collaborative activities. In the technology interactive space, and in most spaces that I've seen, collaboration is becoming bigger and bigger. We're doing more and more things with people outside the design space. We're bringing in stakeholders. We're bringing in developers to participate in actually creating the designs that we're after. And that always leads to the popular brainstorm. Brainstorms used to make me cringe because I'd only ever seen them done bad. I've only ever seen them where it was like somebody panicked and was like, I can't solve this myself, so I'm going to call 16 people into a room for 2 hours, and magically we're going to come up with a solution. And so you sit there for the first hour where the guy's just trying to explain the problem. And then in the second hour, somebody throws out an idea, and everybody sits there and stares at it for a little while. And some people start to trash it. Other people have checked out completely, and after about 10 minutes, somebody throws up a second idea. But it's not a new idea, it's actually more like the first idea with a few things shifted around. And you talk about that for a while, and then maybe by the end of the second hour, you've got a third idea that might be a little different. And if you spend 2 hours and all you come out with is 3 not separate ideas, that is a waste of time. So here's a way to get way more ideas out of your brainstorms. Take the time you have and split it in half. And in that first half, use divergent thinking activities. These are activities that force you to come up with lots of ideas. They give you lots of different lenses to look through, like, well, what if the solution were more social? Or what if it was more automated? Or what if it leveraged this technology? Right? And you do a lot of those real quick to just come up with a lot of ideas, right? Or you time box things, like sketch 6 to 8 ideas in 5 minutes, right? You're eliminating the time for critical thinking. People just got to churn stuff out. So that comes up with lots of ideas. The other half of your time is going to be spent on convergent thinking. This is where you're taking all those ideas and you're starting to make sense of them. You're starting to bring them together where they're similar, right? You're starting to get rid of some. You're starting to consolidate some, right? And so that's going to give you less ideas. That's going to give you a smaller set that are more viable for what you're trying to achieve. And the way I often see groups do this is through voting. Like, let's do a dot voting exercise or show of hands or weighted voting. And voting is an okay technique, but the problem with voting is when you ask people to vote on something, what criteria are they using to vote? Often it's just their own personal preference. We want to make sure that we kind of stay away from that, though. So what we can do as we're making sense of this stuff is that we can critique. Critique primes the pump before a vote so that as they're voting, they're selecting the things that work most towards the objectives for the solution. Right? And all of this is why Aaron and I have found that for teams to work better together, critique absolutely has to be present. It's at the core of good collaboration. And that's where I'll leave you today. Thank you very much. Do we have time for questions? I don't know. Anybody really quick? I got like 60 seconds on the clock.
Can you talk a little bit more about how you can encourage
Absolutely. So the question was, how can you encourage people who aren't used to doing this to do it, and do it like in a diplomatic way? The best tool you will ever have for facilitating any conversation or getting somebody to give you more input are the questions you ask. So it's just about, okay, you just gave me a gut reaction to something, right? I'm not, instead of saying, well, actually, I'd like you to form your feedback in this way instead. No, just, can you tell me a little bit about what aspects of the design made you feel that way? And then they tell you that, and you say, okay, so now let's think about this persona that we have. What do we think, how would they feel related to that element? And so you're not asking them to like structure that 4-sentence feedback, but you're picking that from them by the questions you ask them. And if you do that enough, they'll start to do it intuitively, okay? And I am out of time. Thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate it.